Hi everyone, my name is Richard Helwig, and I am proposing a project in order to really assess whether or not the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly in the DRC and Kenya, has actually made the lives of the local populace any better than it was before, and whether or not these projects are a success. In 2013, Xi Jinping announced the initiative in order to create one belt and one road across all of the world leading to China. What he meant by this is was somewhat debated at the time, but what it's turned into is a lot of infrastructure and business development in a lot of particularly global South countries in order to one enrich China, two to enrich a lot of the countries that they're investing in, and three, to set China back as the hegemonic power that it is quote unquote supposed to be. What we want to do here is, as opposed to a lot of the literature looking at the more macroeconomic research done into whether or not the BRI is a success, we want to look at how a lot of these BRI projects actually affect people's lives. Note I say BRI projects, as the BRI is a bit of a misnomer in calling it a unified project, but is more, I guess, a general theme in describing a large initiative to begin investing in a lot of different sectors in a lot of different places. So why this issue specifically? First, I think there's a lot of rhetoric talking about the negative effects and whether or not foreign aid and investment is worth it. But because of that, I want to really look at these two specific examples, one in southern DRC and one in Kenya, in order to really gauge if that sort of pessimistic notion is true, particularly in a micro level. And second, the Belt and Road Initiative, in terms of the wider Chinese economy, is very wide-reaching, just particularly because of the amount of investment they've already put in. One scholar has described success in Africa is a focal point in understanding a rising China, and is, as another scholar put it, potentially capable of damaging the CCP's domestic foothold, potentially putting the current Chinese regime at risk should it fail spectacularly. So why do a case study of the DRC and Kenya specifically? Number one, generally speaking, Kenya is a lot more stable than the DRC, and both have large economic impacts for China. One, because Kenya is a major holder of debt due to Chinese loans, and second, the DRC is very well situated with natural resources, which are very important for China's ultimate aim of still being the global manufacturing capital of the world. Now, the DRC's safety record may be a bit concerning, but I have specifically chosen a place in the southwestern part of DRC as opposed to the eastern DRC for that safety reason, as I feel doing research will be a lot easier in that location as opposed to another. And Kenya is relatively stable for us to be able to go in, and in fact actually got a better global peace index score than the United States did in 2022. It also helps that for the DRC specifically, I already have a plethora of experience working with a lot of prospective investors in Kinshasa. Generally speaking, a lot of the more established literature looks at a lot of the more macroeconomic components to the BRI. And while certainly that is important, there are two main gaps in the literature that I've found. Number one, a lot of scholars haven't been able to yet discuss the more long-term and more microeconomic implications of the BRI and more demographic impacts of it, just due to how long the BRI has been in existence. And two, because of that, it hasn't really looked into the question of whether or not the BRI is actually making the direct people it is affecting, if it's making their lives any better. They're mainly just focusing on how China is or isn't benefiting, or how the state itself that is hosting that project is or isn't benefiting. What we hope to achieve by doing this research is threefold. One, whether or not the investment projects are a stated success, whether or not they're profitable. Number two, if the lives of the locals livelihoods or standard of living have changed since the start of the projects. And three, if the perception of China has improved or not improved since the start of those projects, both locally, nationally, and in terms of the region itself. In terms of my hypotheses, I believe that the investment projects are not profitable. Number two, that the lives of locals are being negatively affected. And three, I think overall perception of China is decreasing locally, but increasing nationally and regionally. In terms of our methods, we're going to be creating a survey with many questions in order to gauge specifically how these people's lives have changed since 2013, when the project was first established, and now. I think doing this sort of like retrospective look will give us a more fuller picture in terms of how these people's lives have been improving. And we're usually going to opt for either laborers or workers who work near or for these individual firms, local business owners, particularly those in Nairobi, such as those who protested a lot of the Chinese market being set up in Nairobi. And then for more like secondary stuff, we're also going to look at more secondary research when that becomes available. Broader demographic and economic data from the DRC and from Kenya, as well as doing a separate questionnaire in an appropriate language with local government officials, as well as Chinese officials and business people, if they are willing to discuss or talk with us. Overall, I think the main impact of this study will be to really set the precedent in how we examine a lot of these projects by the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, since a lot of them are starting to mature, are really starting to go up and running, and we're really able to see on whether or not they are a financial success for the Chinese and whether or not they really adversely affect people's lives. A study of this nature will also help to study how, say, Western investment or how future Chinese investment will affect these populations, and see if whether or not China's initiative for a global new Silk Road really is worth its weight in silk.